Hello, I'm Jennifer Keller, the Programming Coordinator at the Westport Library, today with two poets in honor of #Shelter in Poetry, John Sands and Richard Blanco. John Sands, a winner of the 2018 National Poetry for his second book, It's Not Magic. He's the author of The New Clean, the co-host Poetry Gods podcast, and a curator for Super Duper Fresh, a monthly reading series. His work has been featured in the New York Times, as well as anthologized in the Best American Poetry. He currently teaches at Brooklyn College and Urban Word NYC. Welcome, John. Say hello.
Hey, Westport and all. Good to see you. Hope you're staying safe.
Great, thank you. Richard Blanco is our second poet. He is the fifth presidential inaugural poet in U.S. history, reciting his poem today at President in 2013. He has written numerous collections and chapbooks, as well as an award-winning memoir. He was named a Woodrow Wilson Visiting Fellow and received honorary doctorates from colleges. The Academy of American Education Ambassador has been featured on Sunday Morning, NPR's All Considered, Fresh Air with Terry Gross, and around, including Telemundo, BBC, and PBS. His newest question is How Country. Welcome, Richard.
Hi.
So I'd like to start off with what inspires you both to write poetry?
You want me to go? I can go first.
Go ahead, John.
I
You're more inspired than I am.
Yeah. I mean, it's such a broad question that honestly, it's one you could ask on 100 days and get 100 different answers. And so one thing that I will say that maybe is a roundabout way of answering the question is that of late, I've really been asking myself, what is the thing that I'm making? And it's been really helpful to me as a reader and as a writer to think about the poems that I'm writing as being fully living creatures, as being alive themselves, as being able to hold the amount of emotional complexity that we as people can hold. And so it's not a fault in a poem if it is mourning simultaneous to its ability to find infinitesimal joys or celebrations. It's not a fault for it to be both funny and tragic at the same time. Oftentimes those are characteristics of our lives. And I think when I first, I'm from Ohio originally, and I moved to New York City in 2006 on my own personal quest for writerhood. And I think when I first arrived in New York, I was thinking, these are my serious poems written by a serious person who I'd need them to be taken seriously. Serious. And, I think in so many ways in doing that, I was denying my poems kind of the tenderness of myself or the humor that I have, or literally my whole family was just like cut off from the poems. And there were all these stories that weren't allowed to enter because I felt like they clouded the seriousness with which, I was trying to channel. And the older I get, the more I think of all that stuff as faucets that need to be open. All the different parts of me need to be open in order to make this thing. And so I think part of why I write poems and part of what it is to be able to take all those parts of you, add in this ingredient of craft of what it is to really try to be precise and name something. And once you can hold it outside of yourself, then I think there's a great deal that you can learn from it. And that experience happens to me as a reader, but there's something about being lost in I think it was Knausgaard who was like, when you read, you get lost in someone else's world, but when you write, you get lost in your own eye. And there's something about being able to hold it all outside of you and say, oh, there it is. Wow, I can see things now since it is just barely outside of me that I couldn't see before. And so it's not only an avenue towards growth because there's so many worlds of writing, but I think it satisfies a deep, deep curiosity in me to be a writer.
Okay, Richard, that's a hard to follow.
No, I think we're circling around the same kind of answers. I think taken outside of poetry, I think just the impetus of to be an artist in general is to investigate the world, to be active in the participation of your life and yourself as witness to this world, to not let life pass you by, to make time pause and look at that for a second and pay attention. And I think for me with poetry, it's the same thing. I feel alive when I'm writing poetry. I feel like I'm active, like I'm being active in my own life and in the world. And I feel like every time I write a poem, I discover something new and interesting or terrible about myself or someone in my life or a memory. And so I just feel like otherwise I'm just like drifting through life. And I think all artists sort of share that sort of as a baseline, that kind of motivation. A lot of things that John said, I said in virtually some of the same context. That investigation also, that examination, that discovery is often about these complexities of life, right? These natures. Often we come to a poem thinking one thing, and in the process of creating art, you realize you think that and this and that, and sometimes those things are completely contradict each other, and that's a good thing, right? So just really delving and scratching and realizing to get to some core, some more, to get into those complexities to really contextualize your life and the world around you. And then there's also sort of the idea of I wrote some notes down here, some invest it, but also I think the transcendent piece, like John was talking about, and also then when the poem lives outside of you. So I often begin my poetry writing workshops by saying, writing a poem is the stupidest, most arrogant, self-serving, idiotic, completely self-absorbed thing you can do in the world, right? And I say writing a poem is also the most generous, gregarious, selfless thing you can do in the world, because in the machinery of a poem or of art, what we're trying to do ultimately is transcend the very story that we are so impassioned by, so confused by, that the only way that we can sort of get anywhere is by making art. But once that thing exists outside of you, once it says, oh my God, look what I learned. And then it's like a gift for someone else. And then so this interaction between what is a reader, what is the poet, and what is the poem has this interesting relationship. And then it's somebody else's poem. And it's like saying, look, here's what I discovered. And hopefully maybe you discovered the same thing by reading this poem. So that kind of interaction, the idea of audience is not, everybody's like, who's your audience? Like, well, the entire world, like anybody who's ever loved or lost or, but that is ultimately also part of the motivation, is to hold that hand out and say, I think it was Jane Hirschfield that said something to the effect, me too, see? And so it completes the circle in a way. So all those things keep me going. I'm very crabby when I'm not writing, because I'm just going through the motions of life. And, like I say, there's cat litter Richard, and there's the poet Richard. I'm just changing the cat litter, figuring out what to have for dinner. Like, I don't want to lead a life like that. And I think, again, we give back, artists make life pause too. And I think we give that to the reader to say, listen, just pause for a second. Look at this.
God, you make me think so much. Two things that brings up for me, Richard, are like, well, the first is, I think a poem's role is similar to, have you ever, been out to dinner with an old friend and you're kind of catching up You know, the like terrible patching. Oh, what have you been up to? Oh, no. I don't know. You seen any good movies like that? Just, I mean, there's nothing wrong with it, right? Like we do that. And then, you know, someone says a true thing. Someone says, yeah, I don't know. I've been really struggling with this thing that's going on with my dad. Not like an overshare, but just like the right tenor. And all of a sudden the blanket of the conversation is like, boop, and we're in there. And I think, you know, I know Richard teaches a lot, but as an educator, that to me, as much as any sort of craft discussion, which are super necessary because they're how we access this burning thing that we're talking about, but you put a poem into a room and that poem takes that first step of vulnerability. And afterward, if it's the right poem and you facilitate it right, there's no more pretending in the room. And I think poems make it very difficult to pretend in their presence. The good poem.
That's true. That's a great analogy, and especially when the second martini comes around and things, when you're a friend and everything. But you know that also happens with us in the poem, right? Because there's a point when I'm writing a poem when I'm kind of sitting with the guy, with my friend, going, yeah, putting language on the page, and yeah, oh, that's a cute image. And there's a moment where the poem starts turning. And it's like then I start having a real conversation with myself, which is all the BS goes away, and suddenly you're like, oh, that's the poet. That's Richard the poet, not the cat litter Richard. That's a great analogy, yeah.
And I think if there are people who are writing who are needing the advice that I need most days, it's that you have to get through the presence of cat litter Richard in your poem in order to find that thing. I was teaching a workshop on persona poems recently, and Richard has some unbelievable persona poems in the new book. And I think, you know, my biggest advice was you got to get through the first 10 to 15 lines where it just sounds like you're writing a riddle. You know, like you haven't hit the discovery yet, so it's gonna feel a little corny. You're gonna be like, oh, I'm tall and I have limbs that are right outside your window. What am I? I'm a tree, right? Like that, because you haven't hit the discovery yet. And as the writer, you think, oh man, I'm doing it wrong. But oftentimes, you know, that first martini is really necessary. I don't mean to bemoan the small talk aspect of it, but it's about patience as much as it is about, you know, the ability to ruthlessly pursue the discovery when it presents itself.
And the discovery is, I would say, is the poem. It's that moment where you're like, oh, that's the poem. And the reader feels that too, I think.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Okay, well, I haven't had a martini yet today, so I am not going to read a poem. I'm going to let you two, there you go, let you two. Would you both share a poem from your collections or something that you've written lately?
Sure.
We can start with Richard this time.
Let's see. Well, I want to read something kind of shortish. It's not from the latest collection, which is a little more socially conscious, political, whatnot. Yeah, I have pants on, thank God. So I'm gonna go get this book. Where is it?
Yeah, you gotta wear pants for your Zoom calls. People really playing it risky out here. Like they're not gonna have to get up and get a book from the bookshelf.
So since we've been talking about sort of writing and the process, this is a poem, what we would call, I guess, an ars poetica of some sort. It's a poem loosely about creative process, about writing, and whatnot. And it had to do with writing my second book, though it came out in the third book. And basically I went out and set my entire manuscript on fire.
Wait, like legitimately on fire?
And then this is the poem that resulted in what I realized that in writing this poem is that my poems are bigger than me. By that I mean that they have their own life. They're not controlled by me at some point, and I have no choice. I can't kill them. They're alive, and like you were saying, they're alive in the world, and whether you love them or not, there they are. And So it was a letting go of sorts. It's called Burning in the Rain. Someday, compassion would demand I set myself free of my desire to recreate my father, indulge in my mother's losses, strangle lovers with words, forcing them to confess for me and take the blame. Today was that day. I tossed them, sheet by sheet, on the patio and gathered them into a pyre. I wanted to let them go in a blaze, tiny white dwarfs imploding beside the azaleas and ficus bushes. Let them crackle, burst like winged seeds. Let them smolder into gossamer embers, 1,000 gray butterflies in the wind. Today was that day, but it rained, kept raining. Instead of fire, water, drops knocking on doors, wetting windows into mirrors reflecting me in the oaks, the garden walls and stones swelling into ghostlier shades of themselves, the wind chimes giggling in the storm, a coffee cup left overflowing with rain. Instead of burning, my pages turned into water lilies, floating over puddles, then tiny white cliffs as the sun set, finally drying all night under the moon into papier-mâché souvenirs of the day the rain would not let their lives burn. So that's kind of what we're talking about, right? And after that, like, there's this weird letting go, and then the book got published like 6 months later. So, but that was, and I hate saying this about poetry, but it's a true story. Like, I literally went out and and then later I actually dumped it in the Potomac, and then I like shredded it all over Washington, D.C., where I was living at the time, ironically.
And those were the only copies of those drafts? Like when you...
What's that?
Were those the only copies?
Oh, no, it's very symbolic. I printed out a copy and
got you. Still, I love that poem.
It was a symbolic gesture. Like kind of going to church.
Okay, John, your turn.
Yeah, I mean, I would just say that poem in Richard's book has a big dog ear from me. I love that poem, and I feel like there are so many. I've never really lost the fact that when I hear a poem that I love, I'm like, I'm so grateful that you decided to sit down and actually transcribe that. Because there's so many moments that just pass by where you're like, wow, this is meaningful. And what is for breakfast? And so every time that somebody sits down and writes that, I mean, that's really worth celebrating. So thank you.
Thank you, John.
Okay, I'm gonna read a new poem. I was lucky enough at the beginning, or really at the end of March, to hop on with some of my favorite author friends, and we did like 10 poems in 10 days at the end of March, and I felt like it was a really necessary kind of collective processing through creativity that I think for a lot of us allowed us to kind of get to the next week. And so this was a more recent poem. So yeah. My oldest friend, kindergarten friend, born to be wild, 4th grade talent show friend, like a movie about boys who take turns masturbating in a basement friend. So intimate friend, so 5 a.m. drinking Cokes in a basement friend, so 3 a.m. puking absolute in a bush. I'm saying 2-minute voicemail about nothing, like not a movie. We lived together, like he doesn't hide when he talks to me. If his heart hurts, he won't say it like that exactly, but like, yeah, I don't really, like his pauses hold language. Did I mention that we laugh? Like he has the keys to my car, like old laughter that never soured, like a page that up and forgot to turn, like a blue blood engine. That's how deep the laughter comes from. He is a physician's assistant, like he's there for my calls, like we're boiled from the same soup pot. But in my bowl, we say, I love you. Even though love is like a sun without clouds, easier to feel than to stare at. Maybe I'm saying, I history you, different than I say to my wife, like, I forever you, I live and will die you. I know he histories me too. I think I know that, but he can't say it back, so I don't say it first. Then this week, more raw and scary than other weeks, I'm saying, I know where he works. I don't say love to your family or sending you love. I say, I love you. And slowly, and it sits there. He says, same.
That's awesome. That's great.
Both. That was fantastic.
Thank you.
So, are you, I know you guys are writing these days, but are you reading anybody else's poetry to get you through this isolation? Is there a poem that you have tucked away that, you know, from a long time ago that you bring out in those darker moments?
Good.
Anything?
I can go first. If you want.
Yeah, go, John.
Yeah, I think so. You know, it's a tricky question because I do feel like poetry sometimes gets relegated to the inspirational or the elegiac, or just like it's there for these specific moments. But that's honestly not what draws me to poems. Like I don't think I find myself to poems for like one specific purpose. Oftentimes the messiness of what they explore is as inspiring to me as the kind of elevated thing that they might want to claim. I oftentimes think of artists or poets as both ambassadors of our cultural imagination while also being ambassadors of our cultural reality. And so there are oftentimes so many kind of inspirational platitudes that are everywhere, and we turn to poems to be like, no, look at it in the face. And I think that that's really necessary in a time of, you know, national gaslighting on a daily basis at these press conferences, or you know, a moment where oftentimes the trust level of the stories that we're getting from our national storytellers are untrustworthy. And so I know that frustration oftentimes makes me crave the reality that comes with a good poem. And so I've been thinking about this poem a lot recently, but truly I've been thinking about this poem a lot since I read it for the first time. And it's by Nazim Hikmet, and it's one of his most famous poems, and it's called On Living. And you know, you probably don't need that much biography on Nazim Hikmet, but he's a really interesting figure who was, you know, a prisoner in his own country because revolutionaries were reading his poems, and then he lived his life in political exile. But it's called On Living. 1, living is no laughing matter. You must live with great seriousness, like a squirrel, for example. I mean, without looking for something beyond and above living. I mean, living must be your whole life. Living is no laughing matter. You must take it seriously, so much so and to such a degree that, for example, your hands tied behind your back to the wall, or else in a laboratory in your white coat and safety glasses, you can die for people, even for people whose faces you've never seen. Even though you know living is the most real, the most beautiful thing. I mean, you must take living so seriously that even at 70, for example, you'll plant olive trees, and not for your children either, but because although you fear death, you don't believe it, because living, I mean, weighs heavier. 2, let's say we're seriously ill. need surgery, which is to say we might not get up from the white table, even though it's impossible not to feel sad about going a little too soon. We'll still laugh at the jokes being told. We'll look out the window to see if it's raining, or still wait anxiously for the latest newscast. Let's say we're at the front for something worth fighting for. Say there in the first offensive, on that very day, we might fall on our face dead. We know this with a curious anger, but we'll still worry ourselves to death about the outcome of the war, which could last years. Let's say we're in prison and close to 50, and we have 18 more years, say, before the iron doors will open. We'll still live with the outside, with its people and animals, struggle and win. I mean, with the outside beyond the walls. I mean, however and wherever we are, we must live as if we will never die. 3, this earth will grow cold, a star among stars, and one of the smallest, a gilded mote on blue velvet. I mean this, our great earth. This earth will grow cold one day, not like a block of ice or a dead cloud even, but like an empty walnut, it will roll along in pitch black space. You must grieve for this right now. You have to feel this sorrow now. For the world must be loved this much if you're going to say, I lived. I mean, honestly, we could take 2 hours and not even scratch the surface, I think.
Right.
Like, this poem is one that is like so out of frame that every time I try to look at it, I miss another part of it because I can't hold the enormity of it all in one space. But I think it's relevant to say that in this ambitious topic of trying to tackle what it is to live, he names some things that are really helpful now and always. He has this testimony to presence of what it is to be able to hold your own life in this small, temporary moment and be fully present with it, even as you understand that somewhere it's temporary. So, and then he expands that and said, you must take that moment so seriously that you'll die for others, that it doesn't work unless you recognize that this living is a shared experience and that somehow inextricably our lives are connected and there are sacrifices worth making for the idea of living in general. So he's like, you have to live your life as you, but you have to live your life as others. And then the turn at the end, which I think is so necessary, is that he says, you need to understand that part of living is truly understanding that you're going to die. Not just understanding it on an intellectual level, but a visceral, emotional grief level that says you can't run from the fact of how temporary it is. And when I think of many of the most, systemically unjust forces, I oftentimes ask myself, what are the emotional underpinnings in people's personal lives that maintain unjust systems? And I oftentimes think of the animalistic knowledge that we will die and an unwillingness to look at it. And so I think this poem begs you to look at how temporary you are in order to put your own fears in perspective, among other things. But I do think we live in a world oftentimes where people who are 90% physically safe on any given day want to feel 100% safe. And they'll go to any measure without inspecting it of like what it would be to feel safe. And it's oftentimes at the expense of people who are 30% physically safe. And so people right now, even in quarantine, are like, you know what I need to just feel better about this is like some non-essential good. And as long as I don't look at it, then I won't understand that like an Amazon worker has to go like take that off a shelf and scramble to something. And I don't mean to make it so soapboxy because nobody is perfect. But I do think that this poem begs us to understand and put our own lives in perspective in a way that I think makes us essentially more generous. But I could keep talking about this poem forever. I love it.
Hey, John.
All right, that was a very long answer.
That's okay. So Richard, what are you doing to keep going through this?
Well, thanks for that, John. That is a beautiful poem. Author again?
Nazim Hikmet.
Okay, you'll send it to me.
Definitely.
I want to point out a couple things about that poem, which are really interesting, though, maybe just from a craft. People are often, oh, poetry's so complicated. Like, notice the language in there, or even in John's, or even in my poem, really, the language what's complicated sometimes, at least in the contemporary sense, is not complicated, but intense is the idea, and all the ideas that are in such wrap. So a lot of times what we're trying to do is just find the right combination of words or language, but it isn't about a puzzle. It isn't about, sometimes it's point blank. I'm setting my poems on fire, or you need to realize you're going to die. Like, period. I mean, it's not just like talking to the neighbor or whatnot. It is poetry, and it is carefully chosen language. But I love that, sometimes it just, poetry can be very, quote, plainly said. And it's really the idea and the emotional complexities that we were talking about that the poem surfaces and finds language for, like the language we're trying to find for your friend, right? Like, it's like just trying to find language that delivers that. So in terms of what we're going through right now, I was reading something about Billy Collins, who was always is a good one for a quote or two. And he's like, I don't like this whole idea that we turn to poetry, he was saying, like, that means we can only turn to poetry when what? Like, when we're like dying? Like, he said, we should never have to turn to poetry. We should always be in poetry. And so for us as poets, I don't know if John agrees, like, I'm actually living my life the same way, not the same way, but in the same idea of investigation, of like, it hasn't left me. Do I get the idea that we turn to poetry, but there is kind of a stereotype about that it's only about, for weddings, funerals, and, and that kind of stuff. But poets are doing that kind of work every day. They're sitting down at the table, right? And so that's why suddenly a poem from 10 years ago is kind of, in a way, relevant today, because the base emotions, like, I don't know when that poem was written, but like the idea of facing that, facing your death as a way of liberating and being alive in the world and giving to others is sort of something that we should be thinking about, with or without a virus around, right? Because if it's not one thing, it's going to be another. The other thing I love about poetry also is, like, poets are kind of, when things are really good, we're looking for something bad. When things are really bad, we're kind of looking for something good, because, again, we're just trying to examine the complexities of any given situation. As the Buddhists say, there's nothing 100% bad, and there's nothing 100% good. And sort of poets are always investigating the world in that way. So a couple of thoughts on that. So don't get me wrong. Like John said, I turn to poetry, but I turn to poetry every day. But there's also just poems that I love. So it's a little different for us, but I understand the question. And there are poems that I go back to, and I'd like to offer those to our listeners. One of the things that when one is caught up in one's life and one's tragedy and what's going on around us, it's kind of hard. One of the first things that goes out the window is gratitude, right? And that's one of the first things we need to be reminded about. And also gratitude, not for only our lives, but like you're saying, gratitude, that's one of the only sort of panaceas that can break you out of your rut of this world. And that happens to me all the time, regardless of pandemic or not. You're just like, in my world, the idea of gratitude and of giving of the self. And I think that, as we can see, that's something that seems more tangible. So this is a poem that I've read 1,000 times on the air. It's in my bed. It's by Alberto Rios. And it's one of my favorite, which again is tangential. It's not a coronavirus poem. It's not like, I've almost forbade my students to write coronavirus poems because what we're doing is reacting and not really. It's like that first hour of conversation with the friend, and it's like we're not we need to delve deeper in that. And sometimes we just need to sit with it a little while longer than just jump into it, especially if you're just starting to learn how to write or whatnot. But I'm not going to say we shouldn't write. Anybody that sits down and gets a pen and to paper is worth it. So it's called When Giving Is All We Have. There's an epigraph here, which it doesn't explain actually, but it says, one river gives its journey to the next. We give because someone gave to us. We give because nobody gave to us. We give because giving has changed us. We give because giving could have changed us. We have been better for it. We have been wounded by it. Giving has many faces. It is loud and quiet, big, though small, diamond and wood nails. Its story is old, the plot worn and the pages too, but we read this book anyway, over and again. Giving is first and every time, hand to hand, mine to yours, yours to mine. You gave me blue, and I gave you yellow. Together we are simple, green. You gave me what you did not have, and I gave you what I had to give. Together, we made something greater from the difference. So there's a really complexity there, right, of like giving, receiving is also part of giving, connection, that appreciation is not just physical giving, but appreciation, right? There's that line there that gets me every time when I tear up. You gave me blue and I gave you yellow. Notice how simple that language is, but the idea behind that, or the metaphor behind that of, yeah, sometimes it is that simple, right? Like sometimes it reminds me of a kid when you first discover that you can mix blue and green and you're like, what? That's crazy. Simple language, but a very complex idea that took hours to, a lot of times a poem is about distilling something with, it's about the distillation process and not necessarily throwing fancy language on a page. But yeah, that poem gets me every single time. I'm feeling, whenever I'm having a little pity party for myself or for the world, I always turn to something like that. Yeah, there's something beautiful about that poem. And I want to say also, there's something also intangible about poetry that is much like song. And this is what I love about the poetry that I love most, like John's, like that there's something imparted, just like music, that you can't always put a finger on it. And after all, poetry comes from music for thousands of years before it was on a page. And I think there's still some of that magic, just like when you hear a song or your favorite song that you'll play 40 times, I still like can't change like a James Taylor song. I'm still like, I see fire, I've seen rain. I'm like, I have no idea what the hell like the poem means, but I'm feeling it, right? And sometimes you gave me yellow and I gave you green. Like I accept that. My soul accepts that, not just my mind. It's like, and it moves me from the inside out in ways that music does, that I think the best poetry always does.
Wow. I just want to say this has been such a pleasure talking with both of you today. And I want to thank you both for sharing your time and your expertise with the Westport Library community. And really, if you're ever driving through Westport, when you can, again, please stop by. Remember, you at home can buy Richard and John's collections through your favorite retailer, or look for them in the library's catalog online, and visit westportlibrary.org for other author interviews, educational videos, and of course, information about the library. Thank you, John and Richard.
Thank you very much, Jennifer. Thank you, Richard. All right.
Take it easy.